friends. Welcome to another installment of Rick the Grace Man. And this is a beautiful Sunday. We've had rain here in central Iowa for most of the week. And it's the first day we've actually woke up to some sun. There was a little bit of fog going on outside. And it's in the 70s. It's almost fall. Technically, it could be fall. I hope this isn't a sign for a much nastier winter to come. But hey, what I'm looking at is something that was discovered a long time ago. And it's been argued over years and years and years about exactly what it is, who made it, and just how old it really is. If you're like anybody if you're like me, a curious individual who has a kind of a wandering mind for what things that crop up, and you got to rub your chin and go, is that fake? Is that true? What is really going on? I mean, I'm looking at ancient technology. Some people will say it's alien technology or evidence of great advanced societies that existed long before we have recorded history of them. And lots of people will tell you that's just not possible. And there's a whole lot of those people in the establishment that will not accept things that are outside their narrow view of absolutes. And yet, being a fan of post-apocalyptic genre, whether books or, I have this awesome series of books called The Traveler, come out of the late 80s, early 90s, and another series called The Survivalist. These are, pocket books, paperbacks. They weren't easy entertainment, a couple bucks at the local gas station or bookstore, and they were meant to be read and then thrown away kind of thing. And others, TV movies and things where the world's gone south. Mad Max comes to mind. There's scores of others of how society blasts itself back into the Stone Age or disintegrates, society collapses, and people survive, and that's the basis of the genre. Now, The Walking Dead is a more recent version of this, where a genetically modified calamity occurs and is in the process of decimating humanity. Meanwhile, in a short period of time, we see just how fast our modern society can disappear, how Mother Nature and the elements take their toll, and how rapidly they do so. Now, there was a TV series on, I don't know if it was History Channel, I think Discovery Channel maybe, that did Beyond Humans or something, where they show what the world would be like without humans, and how fast everything reverts and is buried or covered up and destroyed. Our most common objects would not survive 10,000 years or 5,000 years, even 1,000 years in most aspects. Right now, where you're sitting, your tables, your chair, that computer or laptop, none of that would last 1,000 years, at least not in any recognizable form that we know it, if it's left and exposed to the elements. They just will rust, they will diminish. Plastic just devolves and splinters and eventually just becomes a pile of something that intermixes with the soil around it. And we wouldn't, without vast technology of science being able to break down the elements of a handful of earth, how would we know what's in it? And we know from our own current archaeological standpoints, depending on, unless you're left out in the driest, most desolate portion of the planet, where you might survive, your item might survive 1,000 years. The lion's share of the rest of the planet, it's not going to happen. And even if it did, it's going to get buried. The ground around us builds up over time. Just look at the corners of your house. Unless you're a super tidy individual, you're going to find a layer of dust on everything. And if you let that dust pile up over time, it becomes thicker, and it actually ingrains itself. So if you let dust pile up for a decade and then go back and clean it, there'll still be elements of that dust even after you're cleaning, because it's embedded itself into the material that it's sat on for so long. That material has changed its texture or its color slightly because of exposure to this dust. That's just something think about until you really get why would you bother to think about it? So the same stuff plays out throughout the time and history of everything. Now, you really want something that's going to span the space of time. Well, we have to look at the elements ourselves. man-made elements or non-naturally occurring elements refined and augmented by our capabilities, such as uranium, for example, have a half-life of what, 500 million years, a million years, what? So eventually, even that is going to diminish to the point where if a future civilization, say 10,000, we ended tomorrow, and our civilization collapsed and more or less dies out to the 1% factor. 10,000 years from now, when another civilization has arose, and they're digging and they're digging and they're digging and they're finding up all this bits and pieces of what might have been a historical existence of so and so, right? The half-life of that uranium is still going to be potent. But what if 5 million years passes by? What if 100 million passes by? Well, no, that stuff's going to have diminished. Its half-life's going to half again and half again to the point where it's no longer a problem or no longer recognizable as uranium. Or it would be considered, if it was discovered, dug up, perhaps they thought they found a small load-bearing radioactive material substance that they themselves can utilize in their industrial capacity, maybe. So I look at these things. What is it? There's some farm family here in the United States found a rock with a hammer, basically an iron hammer, embedded in it with a wood handle sticking out. The rock has been dated to be tens of millions of years old. The iron that makes up the hammerhead is millions of years old, or maybe even greater than that. So the implications are, A, it's an awesome forgery. I mean, really an awesome forgery, an awesome fake. B, somehow a piece of neo-modern technology, because I look at the head of the hammer and the hyperhammer, it's not a new version of our modern day hammers. That is something that was probably more popular 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Somehow this item, now it's plausible, let's look at this as a breakdown. It's plausible that the iron that made the hammer, they made the hammer out of, was 5 million years old or 50 million years old. It got dug up as a piece of iron, although the argument is it's refined iron, making it like 90+% pure. So naturally occurring, it's unheard of, from the best I understanding. It's just not something that occurs naturally. And yet it gets buried in a rock that's 10 times older than the metal. So how did the rock embed it? So how did the hammer get embedded in the rock? Theoretically speaking, out of my uneducated head, I'm thinking, gee, well, I don't know, maybe some kind of natural magnetic, some kind of magma event took place, or somebody was manufacturing something and in a place at a time that allowed the rock to be melted sufficiently enough that this thing could have been put into a rock ball and then it didn't corrupt it or melt it or something, and then distributed out here on purpose or by accident. Absurd as that sounds, it's really absurd, right? So it makes the argument coming back to where how is it possible that this hammer, which I should have got a picture of, is embedded in the rock that it is. Third, potentially, maybe a future society member of the human race figures a way to go back in time and takes tools with them, and for whatever reason has a late circa 1800 style pick hammer or rock hammer, because it's kind of what it looks like, and leaves it laying and goes back 10, half a billion years to look at the world and forgets it's there. Yeah, kind of hard to get my head around that one. And, or 4, that there was some sort of society or some sort of ancient civilization that existed back then, or perhaps it's an alien hammer. An awesome forgery, we'll never know. It's like the one where somebody finds this stone thingamabob that looks like it's got a plug, a European-style electric plug coming out of it, embedded in it. That one I'm inclined more to believe that's something that just resembles something. Somebody in our antiquity made something that just vaguely resembles something that we can recognize. It's kind of like that stone image, those stone images of what people say is a modern cell phone. I would have to say an older cell phone, because it doesn't show me that, our modern cell phone would not look like that. This thing with all these would-be buttons carved into it looks more like a remote control for a television set than a cell phone, but neither there, here nor there. The fact that it is some kind of archaic carving on a stone by some ancient civilization of humans who created something that vaguely resembles something we use and take it granted for today. Is it plausible that they were just envisioning something that was completely unrelated to what we put it overlay on it? Sure. Was it because they were exposed to something? Maybe somebody had a vision. And there's so many possibilities, and so many of them that can be debunked, or so many of them that just makes it where you can't ever find anything. So, technology, is that the key to identifying what culture is civilized and what isn't? This fact they had some sort of machinery. This thing here looks like it could be a machine, it could be a weapon, it could have been a piece of artistic license, it could have been a very elaborate hoax. We all never know. We don't know the purpose of this thing. I don't even know if this thing's metal. I mean, it looks metal to me. It was an interesting image that popped up, and I vaguely glanced at it. I'm guilty. I should have put a little more time and effort into it. But it ties in with the ideal of this other thing that was found in ancient Egypt, or in the ruins of ancient Egypt, and it's still boggling people's brains as to what its purpose was. More importantly, how did they make it? And is it even possible for them with their crude tools to do things that they did? Once again, we look back at some of the great monuments that our ancestors produced, and we question how they were able to move such vast materials of such weight without leaving some kind of concrete evidence as to how this occurred, or how were they able to grind the surface, or plane a surface, or perfectly meld it so it forms this flawless, almost seamless connection to the next thing that it's set next to. The technology of drilling through hard stone with crude bronze and copper tools of 3,000 or 4,000 years ago still rails against the probability, but the evidence suggests that some things were done. I look at certain types of ancient ruins, and there's some of them strange Lego-like block stones in South America that litter certain sites, and I look at those things and I think those had to be precision machine products, or somebody has the knowledge, or had the knowledge, of how to take and make a stone equivalent of concrete, to make some sort of liquid stone that can be poured into molds that they carved out of wood with cheaper tools to form these items. And the possibility that truly advanced technology was at play there. I'll have to dig a little more research and remind myself what that site is, but I look at the amount of stone blocks that are there and think there's not enough there to build a building, let alone a city. But they're very intricate, they're very specialized, they're very interesting in the way they're carved and the way they're embossed or they're engraved. And part of me thinks, geez, if I was an advanced alien society and I came here to set up a base camp, I would utilize the local material as much as possible. Perhaps I have a fusion machine or device that can take stone and turn it into liquid form, or to take raw material and transform it into what I want it to do. And in some aspects, what was my purpose? A structure to live in, or a machine? A lot of those parts look like they're components to a machine or something else, potentially something to support another machine. Maybe we see visions of this when we look at Stargate and things like this, where the pyramids were actually a landing platform for alien ships. But the possibility isn't necessarily absurd or outrageous. It's just really hard to get a grip around. It's like the ancient ancestry of the planet. The possibility that human civilizations have risen and fallen numerous times in the biblical stories or the history books that do exist. The Bible implies this. The flood, the flood stories, Noah's Ark came from a fairly robust society. Enough so that he was able to build a very large ship that can hold a whole lot of stuff, and do so with only himself and a handful of helpers and crude tools. Even if it took him 20 years, it's still a remarkable achievement. Uh, Meanwhile, if you go back to the biblical stories of Adam and Eve, their sons are what really have always been a controversial point in my youth and my education and growing up when it comes to biblical things. I was raised in a Christian-minded family. Both my grandparents were registered ministers. My grandfather had a little church. Several of my aunts and uncles were ministers in their day, and I have one or two cousins who pretend to be ministers. They're not really ministers, but they think they are. And not in the traditional sense of the way I understood them. My grandfather was, etc., etc. And somehow they've diminished as time has progressed. But it was implied that Cain and Abel took wives. Well, where did these wives come from? Where did this other tribe of humans come from if the only humans in existence were Adam and Eve and their sons at the time of the Garden of Eden? See the conundrum there? And trust me, this is a can of worms. So lots of people have ideas, and the Bible is absolute, and blah, blah, blah. But the truth is the truth. The Bible suggests that there are other people, and they weren't cavemen, and it's not supposed that they were cavemen. It's not proposed they were another form of humanity that took a different path. That these were people, they had farming, they already established farming. And the concept of the hunter-gatherer had already preceded that. It's hinted at. I'm just saying, right? So, where did they come from? What about their society? Who were they? Why are they, are they the Sumerians that, the beginning of the Sumerians? And because this year we're in the right neighborhood for the biblical stories of Adam and Eve. It's a very strongly given implicated that modern day Iraq or portions of the Green Triangle or whatever were the location of Eden, and God created but he says, oh well, let's go ahead and create a bunch of other people prior to this. So, were they trial and error? They were experimentation for the leading up to Adam and Eve. Were they the blueprints that he kept etching and tweaking and changing before he settled on Project Concept Adam to be the first? Yeah, you tell me. It's just, you tell me. So, the evidence is there that there were much more advanced societies, or there were advanced societies, perhaps not by our modern day standards, that humanity had created and fell and rose. It would not take much of a calamity to destroy one. Even if the story of Atlantis is a tenth of a tenth of a tenth truth, that's a mind-boggling thing to imply that this civilization rose and had the implications there that they were worldwide, they had worldwide access. They traveled the world, they knew the world enough to be able to traverse it north and south, east and west, to the far corners of the continents, and then for the most part were destroyed in almost overnight, or a very short period of time. So if most of their cities and civilizations were built on the coastlines of the Ice Age era remnants, so when the Ice Age suddenly ended, or ended in a fairly quick order, so in the equivalent of it taking 100,000 years for the Ice Age to build up to the max point, and to have it diminish in a handful of days or weeks or months is as good as instantaneous as if it happened with a snap of a finger. Something occurred, they think an asteroid, changed the element of the Earth's biosphere enough that the temperatures rose, and the melt was on, and it was on with a vengeance. And once the melt started, there was no stopping it, and the melting water propagates melting water. I got a glass of ice sitting here, chilling my Pepsi, and the ice is diminishing, and the glass is sweating. So that just tells the power of water and how destructive an engine it can be for Mother Nature and for man in some misguided aspects. If the Three Gorges Dam breaks, China's going to be in a world of hurt. They're already having problems. Can you imagine that? How much damage this thing could do? This man-made disaster in making, pending eventual collapse because nothing's permanent. And they build such a great edifice that at some point they're going to have to dismantle it and return the waters to their former course, hopefully gradually, or it's going to do so by force, because at some point they're going to, through apathy or indecision or inability, maintain the Three Gorges Dam, just like we're not going to maintain, the Hoover Dam or whatever you want to call it today. So when these things fail, they're going to fail spectacularly, and everybody downstream, the world's going to change for them. Whether or not they'll be around to write about it and blog about it is another thing. Maybe I'm a nut. Now here we come to this. This is the gizmo. Now I've seen a lot of gizmo. I've seen that. Oh, I can't babble off the badly mispronounced name of that navigation clock thing that they found at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea that everybody's still struggling to figure out just what it was. Majority today believe it was a navigation aid or device for somebody 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. Somebody who made only one of them. There's no evidence that others anywhere in existence. We come to this thing. What makes this thing stand out for me? I am not an archaeologist. I am not a botanist. I am not a metallurgist. I am not an engineer. But I do have an education, a study of rendering engineers' ideas into a computer blueprint. Potentially it can be fed into a CNC machine or other devices or read by other people to formate and manufacture something. This looks like some sort of propeller or some sort of separator or some other piece of a liquid-based engine or pump. In my mind, this is what first comes to my mind. Other people say it's supposed to be some sort of platter or device for a ritual that involves something. And I can understand why they want to sound and why they would think it would look that way. But I look at the centerpiece thinking that's purposely designed to sit on a shaft of some kind. Something goes in that. So if this was a fancy platter, then there must be a fancy archaic platter. There must be a stem and another version of this thing, maybe smaller and smaller, like we have our little sampler platters, multi-tiered platters perhaps. But in any case, that center protrusion that's perfectly circular and perfectly set in diameter in the middle screams that something should be mounted. It should be mounted on something. And in my mind, a shaft, something that would turn, ideally turning the whole device. It's just like the way the device curls in on itself to form these flanges or these props. They look like potentially inverted propellers. Like in purpose, the device to grab onto things and to push things along or to separate things or potentially to, move them somehow. Whether it's a separator or, like I said, a device inside of a device that manufactures and props and moves things. It's just the sheer elegance of its design is simplistic, yet very complicated and very complex, very hard to do. How would you do? And they said this was in stone, that the original was made out of stone, I believe. Now, why would you make something out of stone? Well, if you don't have a lot of other metallurgy, stone is going to be your go-to for a lot of things. Another potential reason is the stone is a pattern that other things are made from. If we don't look at it from that perspective, nobody wants to talk about it. Perhaps it was a mold from which other things are molded from. A learning tool? Sure looked like to me that this is a piece of machinery. And you can twist it and turn it and argue till the end of the world that this was some sort of platter or some sort of device or a thing for a religious or you know what I'm saying. And I just can't picture that. It's so hard for me to picture. And then we look at it from, an artistic position. If this was an artistic device, somebody created this to be a work of art. It was a one-shot thing. Because at no point have we ever heard of more of these things or pieces of this thing appearing. Now, if you're going to you're going to manufacture something for a specific ritual. That's the word I was trying to come up with, a religious ritual. You're going to produce these things in greater numbers than one. If you're going to use this as an artistic thing, then perhaps it is a one-time thing. One person got grossly lucky and skillful enough to craft something like this out of snow once and never again. Or that it was so fragile that the only surviving one they have is the one that they have. Third possibility, or fourth possibility, how you look at it. This truly is an alien device, a part of an alien component. It's simplistic enough. This is so absurdly simplistic in its complexity that it fits right into some of the stuff that Bob Lazar was trying to describe as the alien technology aboard those aliens, that single alien spacecraft, the 1 in 9 that he was privileged enough, supposedly, to actually interacted with or at least got into. And the devices of the power source and anti-gravity unit that he was temporarily, very briefly introduced to is so complex, so simplistic in its appearance and how it functions, put together with how it melds together with the other handful of components to make it insanely complex and magical and divine in its perception. This sort of thing would fit in with that sort of stuff. If it, at being stone, possibly not. Being made out of a crystal? Think of that for a moment. Just for a moment, think if this thing was actually a crystal formation that was somehow manipulated through alternative methods, whether it be energy or mind power or divine power or whatever. Or if it was a purposely manufactured, press-made CNC device manufactured with high technology for a very specific role. And for some reason, it gets removed from its initial location, from the device it's supposed to belong to, or gets separated somehow, or just gets discarded. If you were, now this is going to go out there. Let's go out there for a minute. Let's take that wide, rocky dirt road that everybody looks at, but everybody wants to ignore. What if this is an alien artifact, and it's part of a manufactured device that served a role? Perhaps this is part of a pump of various forms. Maybe it's a plasma pump, part of a plasma device in a ship's power source, or it was some kind of auxiliary piece of equipment that the aliens brought with them when they temporarily came here and set up a base to explore the planet and potentially meddle with our development or whatever, and they left it behind because it was only considered a piece of junk or just a thing. How often have our people gone somewhere? Antarctica is riddled with garbage that we left behind because it wasn't cost effective to bring with us, or we never thought of it being worth taking home with us. If an alien race were to come here and set up a camp, they could bring devices that help churn, pump water out of the ground and purify it, or to change the atmosphere into something that's more congenial to their existence, or perhaps it is some weird alien cooking device. Fact of it is, it could be such a thing, so common, yet so individual to us, so common to them, that they left it behind because they didn't see it. It was just garbage. It was trash. They left their trash behind. That's what we would do. Why wouldn't the possibility of some alien species doing the same thing? It's not worth retrieving. How much of our endeavors to our other planets are left behind as garbage? Our rovers to Mars have left garbage behind in the aspects of their balloons and their landing devices and pieces that broke off of them, and the rovers themselves. when we went to the moon, or supposedly went to the moon, and left a bunch of crap behind. Crap, by the way, that you can see on the moon's surface. So apparently our government in the 60s went to great expense to moonshot a bunch of garbage up there to make it look like we went there. How absurd is that? How silly is that? Why bother? Why bother? If you're going to make a fake moon landing, then why bother doing the real thing if you're not actually going? It could make the argument that they were worried, so greatly worried of failure, that they went ahead and manufactured a potential moon landing that was fake? Sure, because that's right up the alley of a lot of the crazy people that run our government. All you got to do is look at some of the crap we've been doing the last couple of decades. So, absolutely, could there have been a fake moon landing? But the fact follows up that we did make several moon landings in person, in real time, and have real-time evidence of it, and left physical artifacts on the moon's surface that with a powerful enough satellite you can see and find. You can find the lunar rovers that we put up there and our guys bounced around and they're still there. So if the aliens came by and left something like this laying up there and our people found it, would you think we'd bring it up? If we found the alien equivalent of a 2 million year old McDonald's sandwich box sitting up on the moon in perfect preservation, what do you think we'd do? You think we'd leave it there and say, "Oh, it's just rubbish"? It's just the same aspects. The aliens could brought technology back and left it sitting here. The rest of the devices either dismantled and distributed as exotic things to be revered and or lost, or it was some kind of bioorganic material or something that didn't stand up to the test of time, and this gizmo did. Because we know this is a rendering of the gizmo, but the original gizmo. Or somebody produced something based off an original. The gizmo that we have in stone is a handmade replication of a real original device that somebody seen and wanted to try to replicate. The thing is, grant you, we're never going to understand or know what these artifacts are. And the hammer and the rock, the little thing that looks like a timepiece in a stone, the thing that looks like the end of an electrical plug, an extension cord sticking out of the stone. The footprint in a stone in South America that's in stone that's over 2 million years old. How did it get there? Why is it there? Why is it that we see things that we can't identify? And there's something else to be said about that. We will see faces in everything. You can look at anything, and there's a term for it, and I'm drawing a blank on what it's called, but I've read about it. There's a term that our mind will fill in the blanks. We will see the implications of a smiley face. I'm looking at the full stereo system I got sitting here on the table next to me, and there's a row of buttons that look like a smiley face, another row of buttons in a circle that could be some weird nose, and a pair of really widespread eyes, and then the cassette recorder door. Yeah, you remember cassette tapes. Maybe you don't. Maybe those are archaic things that no longer exist, or maybe it's just some historical thing, or some historical hysteria madness that your grandfather and your parents talk about that absolutely can't possibly be true. But anyway, the combination of all those things makes a very weird robotic face when I look at it, because I want it to look that way. Same thing goes with some stuff. But we know a couple things. This sort of thing would never be created organically or by Mother Nature. The sheer amount of precision turns and angles and concept and placement, it says that's not possible. It's just not something that occurred naturally. This did not grow as a freak experiment in the ground under great heat and pressures, and then spewed forward by an ancient volcano or something. No, this is a manufactured device, whether it's handmade or made out of a press or made from a special CNC machine or something else, or somebody's alien bean riddled butt. This is a thing of manufacture. a precision, rather, and whatever purpose it originally served, or it served, potentially it was some sort. Yeah, okay. I had a slight issue with trying to save. Uh, I want to take a break, and you can click break on them. When I came back, I hit the wrong button because they're right next to each other, and it sits there and basically starts to do recording. So, in order to pick up where I left off, this is first part was pre-recorded just a few minutes ago, and this is to follow up the finished part. Like I said, there's no way that this something of this complex simplicity was grown or organically made. Nature did not create this thing. There's just no way. And once again, I guess that's an absolute, and I don't like absolutes, but the percentages of this being something from Mother Nature is very extreme, very, very unlikely. And if it was true, there would be a lot more of these abnormal, rare things occurring around the world than they do. No, this was a manufactured device from something for a purpose by somebody. The last possibility, of course, everybody loves the alien connection, and I do too. I really, truly believe that there are other intelligence life in the universe, and I would like to believe that some of them are coming here, maybe for good reasons, hopefully for good reasons, just out of curiosity, if nothing else. Hopefully not for nefarious purposes, because I've actually got a couple concepts for book ideas for that, where that sort of thing comes up, but we're not here for that. The last possibility is that our own kind, this is produced or an item that was manufactured by humanity, and perhaps in the distant future of the human race or some variant thereof. Once again, an alien, a human race that raised to great capability a million years ago, and then either completely were annihilated or put back into a Stone Age scenario where it took them hundreds of thousands of years to regrow and redevelop and to relearn everything, because that possibility is there. We have so many chances ourselves today. We are always on an edge of destruction in every moment of our lives. And truth is that we should live our lives as if tomorrow is never going to happen, or as if 10 minutes from now it's going to radically change to the point where most of us won't be here to see it. But it's possible that in the very distant past, ancestors of ours developed technology beyond our capability today, or our future selves, 1,000 years from now, or 500 years from now, or 50 years from now, or 5 million years from now, will develop time travel ability or translocation ability. Now, the argument about time travel, going forward and back, and the impossibilities, so on and so forth. But an alternate form of time travel would be translocation or transdimensional travel, which is a different set of laws in physics. We could travel through time by sidestepping time. In doing so, we create alternate timelines, and that's my understanding of the concept. Or potentially, we transverse those timelines, laterally speaking, in a circle, as opposed to going from forward and back through time. We are sidestepping into time, which means we are out of sync with the time that we're visiting, etc., etc. So, anyway, perhaps there's some technological advance in the distant future that allows us to transform ourselves back to ancient times, or even modern times. And the arguments for time displacement or violating the timeline or what have you are all valid, and they all are something serious, very serious to consider if we ever found ourselves in a position to do so, to actually transverse time. But the fact is that we can't rule out that plausible potential. So, future self, selves or alternate selves from an alternate human history that are sidestepping in and out of our own could have came forward and left something of this nature behind accidentally? Would they have left it behind purposely? It's hard for me to say, unless they purposely left it behind because it felt that it wasn't pertinent, it wasn't important, it was just garbage or discarded material. Purposely, there are too many other things that they could purposely leave behind that our ancestors could have benefited greatly from, and perhaps they have, and they did, and we just haven't made that connection, and we will never make that connection. But the fact is, whatever this thing is, it defies constant current ideology and acceptance. Its aging only makes that more confusing. The materials from what it's made from. That's an interesting concept right there that I don't hear much about. I'm sure people have discussed it in droves. It's plausible and possible to take something that's take material that's ancient, 100,000-year-old stone, and then convert it into some fantastic thing like this, and then leave it behind. So the actual manufacture of the device could have been far more recent, even as recent as their own times, but using material from ancient antiquity to mass produce. The trouble with that is, and there's always those people out there who will lean the argument the other way, or will have a valid explanation, is that the art of manufacturing something itself. So it is noticeable. So when we look at computer lathing, using a computerized controlled lathing machine, and we pick up a 50-year-old piece of rock or meteorite, and we stick it in that machine, and we carve it into something modern, the very act of altering that archaic substance leaves behind some kind of evidence of modern manufacturing. At least that's the way some people have tried to define it to me. So, if you were able to artificially make a 50 million year old item out of 50 million year old material in such a manner that you don't leave any evidence of modern technology behind in its manufacture, and then you purposely bury it somewhere where somebody's going to dig it up and find it, is that a thing? Well, sure, it's a thing. Are there people who do something like that? You bet there are. They're going to do it for money or for fame? I'll leave that up to you to figure out, because I don't have an answer. I hope this little subject material today is interesting and entertaining, at least in some aspect. I find there's a lot of things that crop up and I see as I'm skimming through YouTube and the internet that I have to pause and go back and scratch my head at and think, gee, either that's a very puzzling concept or idea or item or thing, or perhaps my hair needs washed. That's just it. Till next time, this is Rick, and I hope you have a great weekend.